I'm going to talk today about behaviour. I'm going to try and make it simple. I'm going to try and make it uncomplicated and logical. Now, the problem with behaviour is that we are all different. Each one of us. I am unique. You are unique. Why is that so? Well, you have a unique set of chromosomes, and that determines the way your brain is going to react. Then you are in a unique environment. No one has the same environment as what you've had. And learning and growing up, you learn from how you interact with your environment, how the environment interacts with you, and how you behave to it. You learn what to do. That's called growing up and learning. And as you grow up, your brain understands much better how to engage with the environment and become a useful, productive human being. I'm going to try and avoid all the terms about different personalities. Bipolar, personality disorder, ADHD, depressive, anxiety disorder, panic attacks. They're all labels. In fact, because everyone's unique, we can have myriads of labels. And what's happened is that they're always defining more and more and more different types of personalities. So we have a book called the DSM, which has gone from a few pages when it first started in version 1, and now it's a big thick book, and that defines all the different types of diagnostical statistical manual of behaviours. It's very complicated. Let's make it simple. I'm basing this on neuroscience, and neuroscience has been, in the last couple of decades, has been working out how the brain works, what each place of the brain does, and how these parts of the brain interact with each other, producing behaviour. So let's just show you that. If you look here, this is a brain, this is the front of your brain up the front here, down here is the back, and down here is the top of the spinal cord, which is called the brainstem. This is the prefrontal cortex, where you do your thinking. This area down here does arousal, and this area here has to do with memory and emotions, your feelings. These all interact with each other, and the output of that interaction is your behaviour. Now, if these interactions are appropriate, and if the way these areas of the brain react to what's happening to them appropriately, you get good behaviour, appropriate behaviour, productive behaviour. But if they don't, then you get bad behaviour, behaviour which causes problems not only for the person, but for the people around them. So let's go through these individually. This area here, the prefrontal cortex, does thinking. You think, you rationalise, you remember, you try and make sense of the world. It's your conscious, where you're conscious. You say, I can remember, I'm here, I'm a person. That's the prefrontal cortex. If that's not activated appropriately, then you don't really keep thinking. You don't have any motivation to think. You say, it would be a good idea, but and you don't do it. That is very much modulated by a chemical called dopamine. Now, dopamine and over here, noradrenaline, are very similar, and they are the adrenergic system. This is a system in your brain which turns things on and damps them down. It's like a throttle. Now, if that is too low, you just don't have much motivation. So you sit around and do very little. This one is really interesting. From here, nerves come up and they release noradrenaline, which is a stimulant. And it controls arousal. Arousal is really interesting. If you're asleep and there's very little noradrenaline coming up, Nothing happens. You start to flick a bit of noradrenaline up and you wake up. But when you wake up, you're drowsy. You go, oh, what's happening? You can't remember. You stumble a bit. None of the nerves are going. And that's because noradrenaline not only stimulates here, your weight part, but also your motor system. As you increase the amount of noradrenaline, it increases the activity, especially up here. Now, there's a fascinating thing that happens to the nerves up here when you increase the noradrenaline to a certain level. Not too much, but right in the middle, the Goldilocks. Not too much, not too little. And that is, nerves there switch on and stay on for 5 or 10 seconds, and then they switch off. Normally, nerves switch on, switch off, switch on, switch off, but these stay on. And these are the short-term memory, working memory of the prefrontal cortex. When you're thinking about something like I say, 3 apples, 4 oranges, how much fruit? You'll say, well, they said 3 and 4, 7. That's your working memory. They're getting more complex. The ideas that I'm talking about now, you're trying to put them, you're saying, well, he said this, and then he said this, and I'm going to put them together and work this out. Or you're trying to work out the timetable. You say, well, if I go here, and then if I go to this place, I can get to my destination. That's working memory. It's illustrated when it doesn't work is when parents come along and say to their children, go to your bedroom and get some socks. So as the child starts stumbling off to the bedroom, then turns around and says, what did you say? You said, get the socks. So they go there and come out with underpants. Their working memory is very poor. And people will express that by saying, it's foggy. I can't think. I have problems. So you've got to get the working memory going. And that's how you should be most of the time, in that level. Now, if you increase noradrenaline higher, it changes completely the way the brain works. This is for a situation where you're in the jungle and you're being chased. You're tense, you're threatened, or you're playing an exciting game. What do you need then? Well, you need to be very aware of your environment. What you see, any changes, any movement, any sounds, it'll go straight to the brain and say, something's happening. Now that's a very good thing if you're playing sport. You want to be very aware of what's happening. You want to see things that are moving. But it's not a good thing if you're in a classroom and you continuously see something and you're turning around. We call this distracted. Another thing that happens in the brain when the noradrenaline goes up is impulsivity. What do I mean by that? Will you act before you think? Now that's really very important in a stressful situation. You don't want to think about that somebody might hit you, you want to hit them first. You don't want to think when you're playing cricket and you're a batsman and a ball is hurling at you at 100 kilometres an hour. You don't think, I wonder if that's going to come this way or that way. You act because you've practiced it so much that it just becomes automatic. It comes in here and comes out in your hands. Now, that's good, except when you're not in that situation. When you're in a classroom and somebody jabs you, you don't go along like that and hit them. Or if somebody says something rude to you, you don't swear back at them. But the problem is, if you're highly aroused, you are programmed to be impulsive. You are programmed to act very quickly. And if you, in the past, have lived in a fairly aggressive, violent environment, and you've been hit quite a bit, you're going to react for provocation with violence. You may not want to do it, and I know a lot of the children that I see who have these issues say they're regretful straight afterwards, but they do it. That's impulsivity. I had a really good illustration in my own life about this recently. I have a letterbox about this tall, and it has a shrub sort of coming over it. And I went in there and I opened it up and I jumped. I jumped backwards and I thought, what's happened here? I didn't know. And then I looked to the left and I saw a round thing that looked like a head or a fist. What it was a curtain rail with a big bobble on the end, and people had put it out there for the rubbish to collect. I saw, it went to my visual cortex, which is back here. It said, this is abnormal, this is threatening. I got a rush of adrenaline and I jumped. And then I was conscious of what happened. I can honestly say I jumped before I knew even what was happening. That's impulsivity. That's protective for me in case something happens to me. But it shows that your subconscious actually takes over and makes you act before you think. The other thing is, the thing that happens with noradrenaline is it stirs everything up, including your motor system. And as I showed in this, it's down here in the brain stem. And the brain stem is where all the nerves are going to the motor system, controlling your motor system. And so you see people who are hyperactive, they have fidgety, they jig and jag and they can't sit still. It all has to do with arousal. There's a few other really interesting things about abnormalities or dysfunction of the arousal system, is that oftentimes you find that they have periods where it's very high and then low, and then high and low. And I see this with some children with ADHD. They sit there with their parents and they're fidgety, looking around, hyper alert, hyper vigilant. 5 minutes later, with my droning, they're like this. And I tap on the desk, and I say, hello, and they go, hmm? They've switched off. They're switched on, and they're switched off. And so you get this problem of over-arousal, under-arousal. It's not a stable system where it should be in the middle. Not too high, not too little. In the middle. Some people it's always high, some people it's always low. So a combination of not motivated, that's ADD usually, or a combination of arousal systems being abnormal, not tuned, is ADHD. Now let's talk about something, the other driver of behaviour, and that is here. And this has to do with emotions, and it has to do with memory and emotion. So emotions and memory go together. What are emotions? Well, they're feelings. They're feelings: anxiety, depression, mania, aggression, empathy, and sexual. They're emotions. There's a few rules about emotions. Most of the time, you should not be emotional. You should not be anxious all the time. You should not be depressed all the time. You should not be overly happy all the time. It's inappropriate. It makes living hard. And I would say that around about 80% of the time, you should not be emotional. 2, emotion should be appropriate for the circumstances. If somebody says hello to you, you should say, oh, that's good. You shouldn't get anxious. If when you are with people, you should feel empathetic. You should enjoy their company, like having coffee and going to the pub with somebody or something like that. It should be, you should feel a warmth. Now, you don't want to have too much of a warmth, but you don't have too little of a warmth. You don't want to have aggression. Every time somebody says something to you, you want to hit them. So it should be appropriate. And the other very important thing is the emotion, whatever induces the emotion should come back to normal, to disappear after an appropriate length of time. You don't want it to persist. And in fact, most psychiatric conditions are when the emotion goes up and stays up, rather than up and down again. So let's talk about each emotion, what they're for, and when they go wrong. Anxiety. Anxiety is very important because it stops you doing things. It makes you more alert. You go into a new situation, you go, oh, I better check this out. Let's slow down. Let's think it through. It's good for exams. It's good for when you go into a new city. It's good for when you're looking at a timetable. It's good when you're getting up to talk to people. They're all what anxiety is for. It pulls you back. So when people have no anxiety, they become disinhibited. And the best illustration of that is people when they have a few too many drinks, especially people who've been shy, and then they just say whatever they want, do inappropriate things. That's when you've taken your anxiety down. So you often find that people who have a lot of anxiety drink to get over, give them Dutch courage to get over their anxiety. So you need it. But people who have a lot of anxiety, it has a significant impact on their lives. So many people don't put themselves forward. They don't apply for jobs. They don't feel confident. They don't want to be seen to fail. They don't achieve their potential because they always are pulling themselves back. So it's important to look at anxiety and make sure it's appropriate, not too much, not too little. In general in our society, there's too much anxiety. People worry too much.